Hey everybody, Psychosaurus is here. Welcome back to Age of Empires Online. And today, I kind of want to continue with what I did last time in my previous video about the caravan meta. And this time I want to talk about the gear. And it's like where I see the problems with the gear right now. And now, yeah, back to the caravan meta. Just thanks for some comments, a discussion as well. I truly appreciate it. But overall, from what I took, I feel like there is some fear of like when I suggested like moving caravans to H3, there is like a fear of like, hey, that the gold mining is just not gonna be that good. It's gonna slow down the quest or the times like by. And I had to say that like there's a fear of like I don't know like that it's gonna suddenly take 10 minutes longer or something like that, which definitely not true. I I keep trying it for myself, and so far, like I barely notice any difference in the quest. And to be honest, there is still like an option to just rush Silver Age, to get the caravans. In some quests, it's possible. But overall, yeah, again, just my target for that change is just to make players to use more the gold deposits and learn to like work with the gold deposits rather early than just straight up spamming caravans. I just don't find it that good. Anyway, let's get back to this video. So, gear. And this one, let's just say there's a lot of pieces of gear that I want to mention. And just to, how do I see the gear? So, in my opinion, gear is definitely something that kind of represents the progress of you leveling up, you getting the better stuff, and then at some point, yes, you get the legendary items. And so you have a little bit easier time with the legendary quests. And the other thing is it helps you to like with your units, like how do you build the army and overall like units and buildings, and how you like specialize how what unit does, how much better is it going to be, or if you just use it for general purpose, stuff like that. But there has been definitely pieces of gear that I would say yes, I would say they were underperforming because like of what they are doing. A lot of pieces where I would say okay, this exists, and then there are a lot of pieces, especially added more recently, where I would say yeah, this is like too much. And I've been critical towards a lot of pieces of gear, especially added lately. But some pieces I'm like, yeah, okay, they exist. We'll see how it works out in the end, but yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna just split this into like two parts where I see problems with pieces of gear that are too good, and where I see problems with some pieces of gear like super underperforming that I would say could use some change or buff, overall. But yeah, so let's start with some of the more strong stuff, okay? And if you know me, I've been like critical towards this one item, so I'm gonna start with this one. And I decided to like not put it on the strongest units and rather some weaker units. But recently I've tried out even using like the weaker version of the item, and I found out, man, this is actually working much better than I expected. It's actually a lot better than I thought. This I and this item suddenly feels like, yeah, this is actually a really overpowered item. And this item is Sword of Tiberius. This one has been added already like many years ago. Quite a few years ago with the one of those sets of craftable items. And it's definitely a very powerful item. And ever since it was released, I knew it's a very strong item. And I never wanted to put it on something like Champion or Hippicon or anything like that because, yeah, those units are already strong. Why should I put it on them? So I decided, hey, I'm gonna put this on Hippaspists, Longswordsmen. And it really felt nice. Then I decided, hey, just recently, how about the Osiris's Golden Blade, which is the epic version of this item that is definitely a lot weaker. As you can see, quite a lot. And I have like some really good stats on both of these items, and you can see like the Golden Blade is 10% less damage and 12.5% less health. And that's not a small amount when you compare level 40 epic with level 40 legendary. That's actually huge difference between those two items. But let's be honest, I'm pleasantly surprised how good this sword was actually for me. The Golden Blade, I mean. And so, yeah, I came to a conclusion, this Sword of Tiberius is so unnecessarily overpowered even on those units. So I decided, hey, I don't really want to use it anymore, to be honest. And like, I keep calling, hey, this item should have been nerfed like long ago. And I'll keep saying it, like, hey, this item should be nerfed. Now I would say, yes, it needs to be nerfed, and I realize it more than ever. And some people are like, nah, why should we nerf this item, you know? Well, for example, this is a sword, and I just want to show it to you, this sword, and compare it to this heavy spear, that is level 40, Leonidas Horse Guard spear. Can any of those people explain to me, why should a sword have better stats than a heavy spear? There is literally no explanation. And why should sword be weaker? Because usually the sword goes with a secondary gear slot, typically a shield. In case of immortals, even arrows, okay? But yes, why should this sword be much better than heavy spear? Because heavy spear is usually alone. There is no shield and heavy spear unit. Yeah, there's definitely none. But you have a lot of units using sword and a shield. Like, for example, the Hippaspist, Hippicon, Longswordsman. Somebody could argue, like, even champions, but in case of gods, hey, I can at least argue with the Warpaint. In case of, like, let's say, Aquilifer, you have the banner there. So yes, usually you have some secondary item to go with the sword. Heavy spear? No. So tell me, why should this sword have better stats? Or even close stats to heavy spear? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So this is why I'm gonna say, this is one of perfect examples. Why should this weapon be nerfed in the first place? It should not be that strong. So yes, this is one of those examples. And it, sorry, sorry, a little disturbance here. Okay, so yeah, Sword of Tiberius, 100%, one of the most overpowered swords in the game because of like how many stats it just offers on its own. And yes, this sword should have been nerfed long ago. I have no idea why it did not happen up to this point. And instead, like, I hear excuses like, why should the more powerful swords be being made right now? Because this sword exists. Then nerf this sword. You know it's powerful. You know it's overpowered. Just goddamn nerf it. That's all you need to do. And no excuse to create. It ain't no excuse to create more overpowered swords. No. It's just a reason why you should nerf the sword in the first place. Which, as I said, yes, more overpowered swords exist as well. And it's definitely worth mentioning. And let me just go over here. Brings me to Gajendraja's Sacred Blade. This sword, I don't have it in my inventory, unfortunately. But yes, this sword is again one of the most overpowered swords in the game. Because right now, and I did calculate it, it offers on its own like 70% damage boost. 70% just because you have this sword. When you compare it to the store item, the Sword of Sesostris, that offers 60% damage boost. I mean, sorry, why should a sword have 10% damage boost more than like the Sword of Sesostris, which is pure damage? Not to mention, because this sword offers the critical hit damage bonus stat, which is it makes crits hit harder, which means every percent of crit chance you get this sword is going to make it more powerful. So because of that, the strength of this sword goes actually even higher as you add more critical hit chance. And you can include like the Celtic Milestone for 2% crit chance. You could be using Guard's Hasp, light armor for your Hippicons. You could be using, in case of Immortals, you could be using arrows with critical hit chance. You could be using also shield, the Rostam's shield for extra critical hit chance. So all these items, milestones and such, that add more critical hit chance to your unit, now suddenly, like with this sword, become even stronger. And that way, this sword is actually going even higher with its damage boost than 70%. So that is again like, why should it be so high? So again, another sword that should be just nerfed. And I feel like, okay, I don't have a problem with the critical hit damage as the stat itself, you know. I think it's okay if it exists. But it definitely should be reconsidered how like the weapon itself is going to work, because let's be honest, we could make the sword with just, hey, it's going to give like 30% critical damage. And remember, this is not like just the critical damage itself, but also the base damage is included in that multiplication as well. So when we say 50%, it actually means the critical hits now do 3 times damage, not 250%. It goes straight up to 300%. So you need to like double this value as well. So either let's make the sword, hey, it gives really good amount of critical damage with no crit chance, and that way when you stack it with multiple sources of critical chance, the value of this sword is going to go really high, and that way you can create multiple interesting builds. Or let's just reduce the base damage heavily, give some good crit chance, and then again like reconsider the value for the critical hit damage, and then just let's just people use like more critical hit chance items, you know, and that way when they critical hit, they actually do more damage that way. But like let's reconsider and reduce the numbers, because I'm sorry, but like 70% damage boost on a sword that can go even higher is just too much. In my opinion, this is too much, and a lot of the swords that you could compare it to, like for example the Sword of Sesostris, the Sword of Menes, or even Zahak's sword. In my opinion, this is just too much. This is too much, okay? I'd have to say it should start below, like, let's say the 60%, but as you get the crit chances, it can go beyond the 60%. That's how it should be, in my opinion. And that way you can create multiple interesting builds. Sure, some units could be better with it. Some units don't have to be that good. And other units can be just okay. But let's just create like these multiple options rather than just, hey, there's one build for your Hippicons now. You just put Gajendraja on there, use Soul Advisor, and suddenly, hey, your Hippicons hit really hard when they crit. It just, come on, man. You just created one best build for that one single unit. Come on. Like, okay, there are definitely like more optimized builds for units, but come on, straight up best? That's wrong. That's, in my opinion, wrong. At least give me options how to play that unit, not just straight up one best build, you know. Okay, that would be Gajendraja. Let's move on to Ignore Armor Gear. And I think this one definitely needs some re-evaluation, to be honest. Because we have a lot of pieces of gear for Piercing Frost, okay? And the one I have to mention first is definitely the Piercing Frost arrows. I said it when they got released, and I still am gonna say, and I have to say, a lot of people just use these arrows anyway. These are the best arrows since their release, and no other arrows could ever like compete with them properly. There might be like one arrow, which is the Commontorius Burning Arrow, burning arrows, okay, which is ideal for naval units. But even then, I'd have to say this is actually pretty close, you know, because if you find an enemy navy that has maximum armor upgrades, it gets pretty close, really close, where you might start considering this. Even like, yeah, on your arrow ships, you might just say, okay, let me just destroy buildings with arrow ships, and that's why the piercing frost is just gonna be much better, you know. Now, why is this one so good? Number one, buildings. Buildings have naturally high pierce armor, so ignore armor works against them. And so you can put it 100% on every single ranged unit that uses arrows, and so deals the pierce damage. You could put it on siege units as well that have the arrow slot. So for example, the Persian war wagons, Babylonian siege towers, also a unit to consider. Then obviously arrow ships, those are obviously also a consideration. And I said, like, yeah, you might use Commantorius against navy, but if they get full armor upgrades, or you might also consider destroying buildings, this might be even better option than that, which sounds insane to me when you take a look at the numbers of these arrows. Like 20% bonus damage, how can 7% ignore armor go against it, right? 8 can. 8 can, that's how good it is. And yeah, sure, we have also units like Eneris that don't do pierce damage, do crush damage. In that case, yes, different story. That's not arrows for those, but when you consider how many units, just the ranged units, you know, just consider ranged units using arrows. How many of those exist? And this is the dominant arrows for all of those units. There's something wrong. And I'll keep saying it. I said it back when it got released. I feel like these arrows should just have its third stat removed and then just buff the other two. Okay? In my opinion, this either should be damage and ignore armor, or maximum range and ignore armor. That's how I see these arrows. That's how they should be, and not having all three stats. This is wrong, because this automatically makes them the most dominant arrows in the game. And there's no way you can come up with anything better than this. I can show you like a lot of ranged units, yeah, you just want to have the extra range. These arrows offer them. And then you might consider like, Octagon, okay, yeah, Piercing Frost, straight up more dominant. Like, you use what, 2% damage? Yeah, you get 7% ignore armor. That can be so much better, especially when you consider that units also get pierce armor from armor upgrades. So yeah, in those quests where the AI actually is getting armor upgrades pretty fast, yes, these are going to be much more useful. And even then, like, 2% damage loss? That's not a huge deal, to be honest. That's not such a huge deal. If I can get so much more damage against buildings and speed up the quest because I destroyed buildings much faster because of this, yeah, that's a problem. But yeah, if I remember, I was talking a lot more about these arrows, like in my issue with the ranged units. I don't remember which one it was, but hey, you might find it. It was not that long ago. But yeah, these arrows are just dominant. Just compare it like arrows of the solstice. I was mentioning that, like, because of these arrows, the Ashur's arrows of the solstice straight up became completely useless after the release of the Piercing Frost. These arrows had to be reworked, straight up. Then you have arrows of darkness. Like, why even consider those now if you can get the Piercing Frost? And so on, so on. Yeah, like Apophis, why? Usually people want the range, and again, that's my issue with the ranged units. That there is just so much focus on the maximum range and just do enough damage that your ranged units are just safe and not really worried about the damage, and then you kill everything with these arrows. Whatever, you know. And you know, like, just because these arrows exist, there is no reason to pick anything else, you know. Because you want to kill everything else. If your units are dying, usually you want rather some frontline than just, you know, wasting resources. So yeah, you just... I mean, sorry, this is just such a strong item. But this brings me to the other items. And since I was talking about swords, let's compare this Sword of the Piercing Frost. And let me just remind you, I don't have anything against Ignore Armor as a stat. I think it's a fine stat to have on items. What I don't like is the way the Celeste team actually made these items, where you have like pretty good stats on its own. Like the health damage here is pretty good. If I compare it to Golden Blade, you can see it's definitely very comparable item, you know. But then you have 20% Ignore Armor. Why 20%? Why does it need to be so much? And this is where I feel like the perspective of the Ignore Armor should be like reconsidered again, because I feel like if you just nerf this Ignore Armor down to like 8-10%, it will be completely fine. I won't have anything against this sword. I wouldn't even complain, but 20%? Come on. That's so much. And the way I see Ignore Armor, it should be like a kind of item, or sorry, not item, stat that like specializes your units against heavily armored targets. But when you consider that you have this pretty generic sword with so much specializing stat, it doesn't feel specializing anymore. It feels rather like part of the generic stats. And at that moment I'm like, okay, I use this against Legionary, it's really strong, because now I do just 20% more damage with my infantry unit. Like, put this on hyperspace against Legionary, I'm getting 30% health, 44.5% damage, and then another 20% damage on top of it. And there we go, it's just, again, another big stat item. Instead of like having it specialized against the armored targets, like the Legionary, we instead just give it so much damage. And you can see we're already going like over 70%. Now sure, there are units that don't have the starting infantry armor, but they will get there. They will get there, especially in Legendary quests where the AI goes pretty fast with the armor attacks. So yeah, these Piercing Frost items, a lot of them are just good stats, and then Ignore Armor on top of it with huge amount, which in my opinion is just wrong. And this is not the only item. Even the Light Spear of the Piercing Frost, and just to compare it, I have the Blessed Spear of Thought here, and you can see like 1% more health, a little bit less damage, okay, but then you get 30% Ignore Armor. Why 30%? Yeah, I'm okay if this would be like a little bit higher with the Ignore Armor, like let's say 12 to 15, just some random numbers. But yeah, if this item was somewhere there, it would feel like okay item to me. But why 30%? Why does it need to be so super high? That's why I find it like, yeah, those items just give you so much. And again, just to consider like going against something more heavily armored. Sure, you don't really want hoplites fighting like legionaries, but rather something like lancers or cataphracts. Like, what's the point of buffing cataphracts when you can just grab this item and counter them better because of that high armor, you know? That's why it just does not make sense to me. It should either the damage should be much lower, or just reduce the Ignore Armor. Either make it like very specialized item against like heavily armored units, or just give me some small specialization against those armored units. Okay, yeah, another item, the Axe of the Piercing Frost. This used to be different, obviously. This used to be a specific item for the Throwing Axeman. Now it's just this generic axe. And to be honest, like, when I heard the comments like, we want this to be an option for like Wolf Raiders, Berserkers, I'm like, why? Those units already do a really good job. You don't need this axe for them. Okay, change happened, but again, like, you have this really good damage stat, because this is like the average value of like this level 40 legendary axe. If you just take a look at the champion's axe, yes, this is like the average value, or even the double-edged. And then you get 25% ignore armor. For units like Berserker, Vote Raiders? Are you serious? The most powerful units, and you give them a huge buff against units that should be countering them instead? Yeah, this is just wrong in my book, okay? Again, just really good generic stat, and then a lot of ignore armor. I'm gonna say either make the damage lower or reduce the ignore armor. This one, yeah, it should be like, again, just 8-10%, like, it should not be 25. And just a reminder, like, there is, most of the infantry units actually have some base infantry armor. A lot of them. So when I consider a unit like a Vote Raider, this is definitely an axe you would put on Vote Raider to counter infantry better. Or even Berserkers, you know. Like, usually you don't really use it on cavalry. There are like 3 cavalry units with infantry armor. Sure, it's Juggernaut, like whatever. But yeah, it's like very specific cavalry units. Every other save, no infantry armor on the cavalry units, unless armor upgrades, of course. So, if you ask me, yeah, not against them. Ranged units, most of them don't have infantry armor. There's like Gastroferes, that's like the only one. How many times do you actually see Gastroferes in quests? Sure, you might see them once in a while, but it's not that many. And not that often. Siege, okay. Rams, how many times do you see rams? And how big threat are they against your like infantry units that you couldn't counter them? Like, let's be honest, Vote Raiders just obliterate siege units anyway, so why for them? And Berserkers just do enough damage that why, you know? So again, like, I don't see reason why it should be against siege units. Priest units, yeah, no armor there. And it's like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Against buildings does not help, sure. But still, if you can just kill the infantry units much faster, which, yeah, you typically will see some anti-infantry units when going with like Vote Raiders. So killing them faster definitely helps. Against everything else, you just do enough damage. So again, like, why? Why should it be so high? Yeah, and then I could also mention like the tower ignore armor gear, which is the Walls of the Piercing Frost and the construction blueprints. Now, here I'll be honest. Walls of the Piercing Frost, in my opinion, are probably the one and only ignore armor piece of gear that I consider like, this is fine to me. Okay, I know it's on towers do pierce damage, so it definitely helps against buildings, but how many times do you send towers against buildings, you know, or build towers really close to buildings? It helps, sure, not gonna deny that. But it's definitely more like against navy, against siege. Sure. But still, hey, you have reduced damage, and you lose a good amount of health if you compare this to the Walls of Kronos. Like, in comparison to this, you lose a good chunk of stats to get the ignore armor. Now, I have one issue with the Walls of the Piercing Frost. Since this is a craftable item, the stats can vary. The issue I have with this is how the ignore armor actually works here, because ignore armor, for some reason, it doesn't work properly when you stack it with the multiplicative, which had to be changed to actually stack it properly. But now it's actually, the numbers are being added, not multiplied, okay? So if I have one item with 10% ignore armor and then another item with 10% ignore armor, I'll have 20%, not like 19%. Or anything like that, okay? Probably it would be like 19%. So it keeps adding, and this is where the problem is, because when you are crafting items or just dropping items in general, the stats actually vary. Where you have the average value, and then the minimum maximum is like, I don't know if it's like 4.5% or 5% difference from the average. In this case, the 4.5% is actually being added to the stat. So ignore armor, if we take a look, here you can see 9.6%. And this can go up to like 14%. Which is definitely a lot. And this is why I have the problem with this item, okay? Because it goes so much higher than it should be. That's my problem with it. Which, why I would rather say, here, I want to hit this somewhere around the average. But unfortunately, it is what it is. And then there are the blueprints, of course, which I have one issue, and that is that it's one and only like offensive blueprint. Sure, that is the maximum range blueprint right now, but let's be honest, you just put so much maximum range gear on towers that, like, who cares, you know? Fortress, who cares? You would rather Fortress to last longer than just give it more damage. So if you ask me, this is the best gear for towers, and let's be honest, 15% is just a lot. So I would just lower this value again, just too much. Okay. Yeah. So that would be the ignore armor. And then I have a few more items to mention, and that's going to be the Sad Sash of the Solstice. And I'll be honest, like, I feel like, okay, it offers multiple stats of what the scouts can usually get, fine, but it's still like offering everything you need on your scout, okay? And it kind of compensates for other items, or other stats as well. Okay, so for scouts, if I exclude this, what can you usually get? You can get the health, you can get the damage, you can get the HP regen, movement speed, line of sight. Okay, then there's also the faster construction speed, which in my opinion that is like a little bit foolish item. From my perspective, it is a little bit foolish, but hey, if you like it, okay. I just don't see a reason why I should build suddenly the watch post in like 2 seconds. Like, I'm not rushing with that. I don't see a reason, and I'm definitely not gonna build like 50 watch posts early, so I don't see reason for that. So for me, that's not something I would consider. But now let's take a look at the Sash of the Solstice. Okay, it offers line of sight. Not as much, but it's there. Movement speed. Okay, not as much as the item itself, but it's there. And in combination with these two items, that's what makes the scouts really efficient at scouting, because you reveal greater area, and now you're moving faster, so you reveal more area as you're moving faster. So that way you're more efficient with, and I have to say, maybe not as efficient as with those two items, but it's definitely great efficiency still. So that's one thing. And then there's the HP regen, and in that case I would say it goes against the health and HP regen item as well. Sure, not as strong as the HP regen itself, but you're getting it, and you also have the line of sight and movement speed. So that way, yes, you can just regenerate health. So not that much need for the health, not that much need for the HP regen. That way you have very efficient scout, and because of the line of sight and movement speed, you can just avoid danger better. Line of sight because you reveal it sooner, movement speed, in case you get too close, you can run away, and then the HP regen will keep your scout alive. So that way, yes, very efficient scouting, and I'm going to consider this to be the best item. Now there is also the damage stat, and this one actually, yeah, it does not seem too intuitive to you right now maybe. But when you consider, like, usually you want scouts to assist your villagers at killing some huntables, for example, boars or the elephants. Usually you could use the damage and just kill the huntables really fast with the scout. But there is also a nice thing that the HP regen does and the damage does not, because if you just fight with the scout is gonna take some damage, and after that, yeah, the scout does not heal. So which means, hey, you are going to lose scout in time anyway, especially if there's like multiple huntables, which in some quests that happens. But if you have the HP regen, as you're fighting the huntable, you're healing, and after you're done with the huntable, you're still healing. So in the end, yes, your scout is going to survive and it's gonna heal up anyway. So if you ask me, it kinda compensates for the damage as well when fighting with the huntables. So yes, if you ask me, this is ultimately the best scouts item. It kinda bothers me because it is event exclusive, and I noticed some complaints like, why didn't the sash come back like this year, or sorry, last year summer event, or even the year before, if I'm not mistaken. As yes, people will most likely want this item, okay? And to be honest, like I am not even surprised. It is really good item, and in my opinion, it is the best scout item in the game. So yes, no wonder. And then I have another item, which is the Asher's Rudder of the Solstice, and this one, again, it's just another combination of multiple items. In this case, I would consider the Hatshepsut's Ores, I think it's called. Yeah, Ores of Hatshepsut with the movement speed. Sure, it's like half the value, but it's there. Then you get the training time, which if I consider the epic item for faster production, which goes like 14%. This is like 1/3 weaker, let's say 1/3 or 40%, whatever. Yes, it's there with the movement speed. And then you have the cost, 13.3%, which I dare to compare to the Hull of Khufu and say, yes, this is like 1/3 weaker, but without the negative stats to negative values to damage and health. So again, like, you get free stats, and in this case with no negatives. While yes, it might be weaker than those free items, overall it is so powerful item with what it does. Like, this just feels, yeah, like why to even consider like Hull of Khufu when I can just get this, put this on like fishing boats and just, hey, make them cheaper, make them produce faster, which they have pretty long production time, and then make them move faster, which makes them more efficient at gather rates. And you save some wood on top of it. And no negatives, like, yeah, really powerful item in my opinion. Would definitely consider like reducing the training time and cost values. I think movement speed is fine, but like, you know, like make it weaker, like you combine multiple items and it feels like, okay, like 1/3 weaker, 1/3 weaker, half a weaker, but multiply it and yeah, it's not like whatever, you know. So you have 1/2, 2/3, 2/3. Oof. Still like very efficient. Okay, anything else? Yeah, I think that's enough about the super strong items. I mean, I've been going about this for quite a long while. But again, that doesn't mean there are not like weak items. I do see some weak items. And I have to ask, like, why in the first place should they be so weak, and why haven't they been like changed in some way already? Now, I'm not gonna say like, hey, items that are not that big often, because players usually prefer this. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with those items. Like, for example, the Apophis. In my opinion, arrows of Apophis are really good. It's just people just prefer the maximum range and just attack from distance because it's easier to do so. Yeah. No wonder. But let's talk about like some really weak items. Some really weak items. And again, I'm just gonna focus on the legendary ones. We don't usually care about the epic ones. Usually, like, whatever. They exist. Usually they are lower level, you know, so like whatever, you know, they exist. Let's consider something. And I'm gonna use like example of an item that already got changed. Tools of Valen. This obviously was the worst legendary tool you could find. Because if you compare it to like Hammer of Kaveh, Kaveh pretty much gives you the same gather rates, although not nerfed on the foot, and also gives you construction speeds. Similar would be the Delian Archon Hammer. Again, just better gather rates with construction speed. And then the Divine Hammer of Construction that, okay, weaker, but much better construction speed, you know. Those of Valant used to be really bad, okay? But then they got changed. And let me just look it up here because I know there are some on the market. It got buffed, you know. Sure, you have still the old ones, which, to be honest, I don't know why they could not change the old tools of Valant and just buff them with the newer stats, you know. Like, why do we need to keep these two separate tools of Valant? That's what I don't get. But okay, tools of Valant got buffed. In my opinion, great way. Much better gather rates than what the other tools offer, especially on the food. Completely fine with that, but no construction speed, which means, hey, more food, more resources for me, but I have to build at the same pace as before. This still opens like another way you could play the game, which is like use the tools of Valant, and then, for example, use Philon in H1 to get the construction speed going, you know, and suddenly, hey, you're building faster than with the Delian Archon Hammer. You're still slower than with the Kaveh, but the difference now is pretty small, you know. Still, you sacrifice H1 Advisor for that, but hey, it's an option, you know. It exists. So why not, you know? It exists. Otherwise, if you're not really gonna put it on villagers, well, then it's only for the Indian elephant gatherers, and that's it, you know. Which, let's be honest, if it's just tool that has potential to be used on multiple units, but you put it only on one unit overall, isn't it a wasted potential in the end? It kind of feels like to me, to be honest. But hey, it is. Someone could argue maybe the Summer Hammer for engineers. Okay, yeah, it's a dedicated item for that one specific unit. But yeah, usually you would not put it on the other units because the training time increase that it hurts you so much, okay? And no gather rates, like, come on, you're not gonna put this on villagers or elephant gatherers. No, that one is just straight up. The way the stats are for that item, yeah, it's just engineer, hammer, whatever. It exists, but, you know, like, if it had more units able to use, just like we changed the Piercing Frost Axe for some reason. Yeah. Again, could be possible. And then yeah, so yeah, this was an example of an item that got reworked. Now let's take a look some of the items that I do find to be like pretty much weak. And yeah, some of these are actually were added by Celeste. So let's start with some quest reward items. Athena's Long Spear from the Athens, you know, like the quest pack where you go against Persians. Let's be honest, a lot of people don't really want to use this heavy spear. Am I surprised? Not really. I do think this item could use some small buff. I'm not against it. And to be honest, like, it's not like the item necessarily is bad. It's just, it's definitely weaker than its legendary rarity would suggest, you know. Yeah, it has okay damage in combination with the crit chance. Okay, it can go, what is it, like, yeah, it can be like 70-71% damage, but 20% cavalry armor with just that? Yeah, that's pretty weak if you ask me. Especially when you have something like the Heavy Spear of Sacrifice, you know? Like, if I compare it to this, Yeah, better damage, much higher bonus versus cavalry, and then the cavalry armor. Sure, it's weaker, but hey, you have so much damage against cavalry. At least it does something. Here, I feel like, yeah, if I wanted to fight with anything, I would just go with something like Sad's Heavy Spear or Zahak Spear or just straight up Gilgamesh, whatever. You know, like any of those spears, just pure damage, and it's just gonna do much better job. Cavalry armor is nice, but like 20% when I'm losing like 15% damage. Yeah, I don't find it worth it, to be honest. Not enough. Like, it's not bad. It's not like super terrible. But it could definitely be better. Like, let's be honest. This could be the crit damage spear. If they decide to change it, this could be the crit damage spear. Nothing against it as long as it's not super overpowered, you know. Like the Gajendraja. But yeah, this is definitely one of those items. Definitely could use some change or buff. Like I said, this can be crit damage spear. No need to add. Use something that's here, not being used that much. Make it an option, you know. It's definitely something you could put on any unit. So why not, you know? Okay. That would be one. Another one that would be like Earth's all-seeing bow. Which, to be honest, the only purpose of this bow is put it on the North Scout. That's literally it. Okay, you just put it on North Scout. Every other civ, like, yeah, bow exists. Whatever. You know, like, why should I care as Greeks? Like, where do I put this? Town center? Guard tower? Fortress? Trireme? Toxodes? Why? There are better items than this, you know? It doesn't make sense. So, yeah, like, I'm okay if the line of sight stays, but come on, at least buff the damage. Give me average damage with the line of sight. Then I'm gonna say, okay, at least bow is somewhat useful. But most likely we'll have to do something else as well, you know? It's not worth it as it is right now. So yeah. The other items, you know like how you get the manual, for example, or the Socrates walls? Where's my temple? I have it right here. You know, like, again, like, I'm okay if these items exist, but if the purpose of these items is basically use them before you actually drop the Athenian manual or Walls of the Architect, they are better than these. I mean, sorry, why? Why do we even have these items in the first place, you know? Like, why? Just have them before you replace them? Like, come on. Does not feel right. And then there are obviously like better items that there are quest rewards that actually are really useful, maybe too useful, but there are some pretty nice items that actually you could consider like being quite useful in comparison to these. Like, for example, the extremely tasty carrot from Tarsos. Like, for me personally, yeah, I like it on merchant transports. Then you have the boar loins. Okay, it's completely different item, but yeah, it's fine, it exists. And then you have the Devi's Royal Silken Tunic from Pataliputra. So yeah, again, alternative to the gather robes, although maybe a little bit too much, but whatever, it exists and it's fine, you know. But yeah, just example, Celeste knows they can make these items, some very specific one-time reward items, so why not just change some of these items, you know. Okay, what else is weak? I need to consider. I mean, I could consider arrows, but that's usually like how people play the ranged units. Let me just go quickly through this. Yeah, Sword of Menace. I don't think I mentioned this. Sword of Menace. How many of you does actually use this sword? I dare to say a bare minimum of you actually, or if even any player actually uses this sword. Because why? If I want infantry armor, I'm gonna go with Doomblade of Theocolis. I just craft that item. It gives me so much infantry armor that I can use. If I want damage, yeah, Zahak exists. Sword of Sesostris exists, you know, like, why? If I wanna counter infantry better, I go to the Farafra Oasis and buy the Consul Sword for extra bonus damage against infantry units. So yeah, again, like Sword of Menace is another item that could use a change, but it cannot be changed into Gash and Draja now. But yeah, it is an item that could use some change. Let's be honest, I wouldn't mind if it was like not as the Consul Sword, but if the armor turned into bonus damage against infantry. I think it would be okay as a sword. You know? What else could be weak? Or is weak? I think... Okay, I'm gonna say Ishtar Sword of the Solstice, and... It's not like it's necessarily weak sword, it's rather like, why even pick this sword, you know? Because as long as Sword of Tiberius exists, why pick this sword? Because of the piece armor. And remember, this item actually got the piece armor buffed. So I just don't see like why, when Tiberius exists. Again, reason to nerf Tiberius. But yeah, like, in my opinion, this sword should be changed like into a legendary version of Doomblade of Theocolis. Just give me infantry armor. Like, why does it need to be bonus damage? Just give me armor, you know. And if you just okay, maybe you want to turn it into brutal anti-infantry with a lot of armor and bonus damage against infantry, fine, then just make it, you know, like remove the damage, give me like 50% damage against infantry with like 35% infantry armor, like why not, you know? Let me create brutal infantry counters, why not? Let's go brutal. Probably still like people will not pick it because hey, you need to kill other stuff than just infantry, you know. But hey, it's an option, you know. And another item like Kitten of the Wolf. Okay, and I'm gonna end it with this one, Kitten of the Wolf. I'll be honest, like I don't know why this item is like much worse than the Breastplate of Alexander. Like I have some understanding, but at the same time, like why, you know? It does not really make sense. Why should it be like much weaker? Sure, it's like better version of rare item. I just don't know why it should be so much closer to the rare item stats. Like why? It doesn't make sense. Like in my opinion, this item like can have the same stats as the Breastplate of Alexander. Like people are still going to use the full damage cloth armor, the Vishkanyas. So it does not hurt there, and like okay, sure, I can put this on Berserkers afterwards, but like yeah, like why not put it on Berserkers, you know? Like I wouldn't mind Alexander on Berserkers, but they use cloth armor. So let's be honest, Kitten of the Wolf, like why should it be like much weaker than this, you know? I just don't see a reason. I don't see a reason. Like as long as you have full damage cloth armor, that's just going to be more dominant because people are just going to use maximum range full damage builds anyway. It doesn't make sense, you know. Which brings me to another cloth armor, and I'm gonna mention it because it is worth mentioning. Again, like, there is a good number of items that can use some changes. But yeah, it's the goddamn Toga of Romulus. Like, the item itself is having the same stats. Let me just... Basically, as the Tunic of Actaeon. It's like average Tunic of Actaeon, you know? But with pierce armor. And I'm like, why, you know? Why is it so... Why should it be like this? Why not put the same stats as the... what's his name? Is it Theseus? the cloth armor with infantry armor. Why not have the pierce armor the same stats as the infantry armor? That's which should be like 33%, something like that. Because at this moment, like, I look at this, why should I use this and not just go with like the Sats Best Vest, you know? Like, Sats Best Vest offers me like 20% pierce armor, but it gives me like, what is it, like 10%, 13% infantry armor? Yeah, it just feels much better than this. Like, sure, I lose like 6%, but get more health, get infantry armor, it already feels better, you know? And I completely forgot, there is one more item, actually, that I want to mention. Sightings of the Argo. Let's be honest. How many of you actually uses this item? I bet nobody. I bet nobody. Because why would I sacrifice like 10% health to get 1.4% movement speed? Or even like if I just go armor plating. Like, why use it over this Artificer's iron plating that gives me much more movement speed? Why Archimedes with the crush armor, Legion with the health, you know, like, there's the 10%, you know. Why? For 1.4% movement speed? Why? Yeah, so I'm gonna say that item, either change or just buff it, which leads me to like the Artificers buffing a little bit. Not against it, to be honest, like 5% movement speed is completely fine, but you know, like, okay, I sacrificed so much health to get that high movement speed, why not, you know? Like, why not? That wouldn't be completely bad, to be honest. I mean, it's still like legendary version of a rare item that's like level 23 or something like that. Why not go higher a little bit, you know? Why does it need to be so close? Anyway, I'm gonna end this here because I've been going for a long while now. But yeah, just a reminder, there are items that I do consider being super overpowered. Again, the ones that I would say definitely could use a nerf, Sword of Tiberius, 100%. Piercing Frost Gear, most of them at least, 100%. Yeah, definitely those items. And which item did I mention again? I think those were the main ones. Yeah, mainly the Piercing Frost. Like, some other items could use. And then there are definitely items like Menace, Athena's Long Spear, Ur's All-Seeing Bow. Like, these items, like, why? You know, like, why not just buff them, you know, or change them or to something? Like, you know, like, they do exist, but there is no usage for them except you have nothing better, you know, like, you use them because you have nothing better. So why not just change them, you know? Again, like, I want to know your opinions. Like, do you find, like, there are definitely items that I did not talk about. There are definitely items, but I want to know your opinion. Like, do you feel like there are other items that could use some buff? Do you agree that something like Sword of Tiberius is too strong and should be nerfed in the first place, instead of just being used as an argument to create more overpowered swords? That's right, Gajan Draja, I forgot that one. Like, I feel like instead of like making excuses for those more stronger items, why not just nerf the goddamn item that, like, a single item that's being super overpowered, and you just add more super overpowered item? That doesn't make sense, you know. And to me personally, I feel like we should say, hey, let's put some ceiling on how far the legendary items can go with the stats. And if we cross this, maybe create like a new rarity. Like, I don't know why not just bottom, create like bottom rarity, you know, like, because, like, let's be honest, the bottom items are just made to be overpowered, because that way you just have a reason to spend so much coin in the bottom lottery, you know. But yeah, like, I'm ignoring the bottom items. Bottom items are like their own category, you know. But like items like sort of the barriers like way beyond what the sword should be. So yes, I wanna hear your opinion again, because this is another thing that like makes me worried that the balance of the PvE game is just going somewhere where it should not be, you know. Anyway, thanks for watching. I want to hear your opinions or read your opinions if you leave the comments in the section below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos like these. And yeah, make sure to check out my previous video. And hey, I played some poker, you know, poker night at the inventory. A good game, you should check it out, like see what it's about. But anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.